All right, so now when you get to the actual build, I like to start by putting the pins, don't go anywhere, just from the back forward. Because there's going to be little pin slots throughout the entire body, and that offers rigidity and, you know, helps keep the blaster functioning properly and fitting together. So you can see even without the large bars that run through it, the pins alone offer a lot of stability just because they're so low tolerance. And when you add the bars, the Miscreant just becomes an absolute tank. Before we get too far, I don't want to forget, this is your pusher. It's this little black piece. I want to put it in. And you have two O-rings that are roughly the same size, one thick and one a little bit skinnier. That's for the pusher. I put the thick one on first. This is going to act as the seal. If I can get it on without this thing slipping out of my hand. Come on. Ooh. Sorry, I got greasy hands. Make sure your hands aren't greased up before doing this, otherwise it will try to slip away. There we go. And then I put the skinny one on, and this acts just as a spacer, because when this gets covered in lubricant and slides in and out, eventually it'll try to sit in the bottom of this little groove. But you want to be able to kind of push in and out while not getting stuck down there. So a little spacer, and this, it will work without it. You can just, like a little wipe with a paper towel will clean it off, and it runs as long as there's no like freshly lubricated parts. It runs just fine. Like it doesn't make any difference. But this is just your initial build. There's going to be lubricant probably leaking through the system just as it kind of works itself together. And so yeah, that spacer is there just to help in the beginning. That spacer is going to be attached to this long bar, which is your, I guess, pusher system. But I like to run this through these grooves along the top first. There's going to be a square slot in a lot of these pieces. And I just like to clean out any bits of print material so that you have a nice low friction slide. Again, you don't have to do this. This is just a bit of a quality of life thing to do. Cool. Now you're going to take 2 of your 12mm screws and your 2mm hex. Any 2mm hex will work. I like to use a drill just because, you know, it saves a good amount of time. That's one. And that is 2. And I don't go all the way down initially because I like to make sure that it's nice and centered, because the holes are just a little bit bigger than the screws, and that allows you to have some play and adjustment of your orientation. But yeah, you know, I got pretty lucky with that one. It's very well centered on that bar. And then you just give them a little touch down, and that is ready to go for the back end. So I will start to slide this together. Ooh, no, I won't. That's a lie. The next thing you're going to do is inside of your turnaround. This is probably the most difficult part of this build. And this is, maybe one more O-ring. This is putting this O-ring inside of the turnaround. It's not necessary. I will include them if you want it. It works the same way as a scamp turnaround. So without it, it works fine. But if you just want every little bit of seal, this O-ring, and fitting it right in here. So fitting this O-ring into this is probably the hardest part of this build. But I like to use a flathead screwdriver if you like a large, wide flathead, or even like the trigger bar. You need something to kind of get your fingers in there because otherwise it's difficult. But you can just push it in there, right? So you're just kind of shoving it in between these two slots. And then with one finger you're kind of hooking it. It takes a bit of practice to get used to, or a bit of trial, but it's not difficult. It is finicky. That's the better word for it. It's very difficult to do on camera. But yeah, just like that, that works. Just 2 thumbs to stretch out the O-ring, and then using whatever tool you decide, just push it into the grooves. I like a screwdriver better because it kind of gets into these slots easier. But now your O-ring is nice and seated in place, and it's ready to go. And then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to take your brass barrel and this is another optional step. They will be included. You can take one of these. Oops, I grabbed 2, but you just need one. These little O-rings. This is the same as the skinnier one that we put on the pusher. And then you can just slide this over the top. Make sure you don't cut it. And you're just going to roll it down the length of the barrel to the end. This will act as another way to create a good air seal. And then just slide it. Give it a good little twist. And just go nice and slow with this part because that O-ring will try to squeeze out as you pull through. So I find doing little twists, and then that'll prevent it from, nice and slow pulling and just a little bit of twisting here and there. And then you want to get past the turnaround on the inside. I'm not sure if you can see that. I'll shine my phone light in there so you can hopefully see what I'm talking about. You see that turnaround where it comes to the front? You want to make sure that brass barrel is seated past that so that you're not getting any restrictions. Just give it a nice little tug, make sure it's seated. Make sure that O-ring is not squeezed out anywhere, no cuts on it, because the sharpness of the brass will try to cut through that if you slide it too aggressively. Again, this is just another quality of life if you want the air seal to be nice and solid, but it's not required if you're not going for like ultra high FPS, because the consistency will stay basically the same as the brass creates a super tight fit with your turnaround. There's going to be lube included with your kit, so just take a bit of that, run it around the inside of your plunger tube, and then that can be fit right on here, and you'll feel it kind of slide past the O-ring. Like, you'll feel a lot of friction until it actually seats itself properly, and once you can see it kind of, if you don't keep smacking your thing on your light, you'll be able to just fit it on, and you'll feel it spin pretty smoothly on the O-ring itself. Okay, now this part is in and put together. This is going to be the main, essentially, body of our blaster. And we can start by putting these parts together. We're going to take some more of those pins, sliding them in so the holes right there. We're just going to work our way to the front of this blaster. So take one of your small 4mm screws, and you're just going to put one in right here. So next you're going to take your mag catch after you put that screw in, and you're just going to find the hole in the back of it. It's not really a hole, a divot, I guess you'd call it. And then take one of your trigger springs, or your catch springs, and it should fit pretty snugly. It's not a big deal if it doesn't, but it's just kind of nice. As you do this multiple times, if it doesn't quite stick, it will try to loosen itself up. And again, it's not that big of a deal if it doesn't work that easily off the bat. Take this pin, kind of wiggle your catch around. Eventually that pin will seat itself like that. So now you can feel that catch working. Take another one of these little pins or screws, and then just close it into place. So this is your mag well, or mostly your mag well, and this will fit after we put this guy inside of it. This fits right through here, and then those pins lock everything in place. There is the back of the Miscreant. If you want, at this point, you can start putting the threaded rods in. And to start that process, just take one of your long threaded rod is going to have one of these hexes on it, and you can take a pair of pliers. These are 5/16 hex, or the hexes that fit on a 6/32 threaded rod. Just give it a little twist, just make sure it's nice and set on there. You want to make sure that the rod isn't sticking out of the back of these holes. They're in cut pretty deep, so you don't have to worry about it. But you know, you'll have to adjust the depth that you like as you get the thumb screws and the wing nut attached. Because you can have them fit way deep on, or you can have them sticking out. You know, it's just, you know, adjusting it to your own personal preference. Yep, here's the third one. So you have two long threaded rods and two short threaded rods, I guess medium threaded rods. You have this really short threaded rod right here. That's for the plunger. So there's two medium threaded rods, one long one and one short one. But we are working with the two mediums right now, and the long one. Just make sure that they're kind of there. You can adjust them with pliers at the end, but you know, make sure that your tube is clean. Just give it a little blow. Just get any loose dust that was hanging out in there out. Okay, looking good. If I print it for you, your blaster will have a serial number on it. And then you should take that. slide your pins into it. Then we're going to do the same thing, 2 more pins. And then you're going to have a large grip hiding somewhere. I don't know where I put it. Alright, next you're going to take your grip. This will slide on just like everything else. Nice and easy. And then we can put your grip cover, you know, depending on covers. This guy went black with black. And then just take your 2, ooh, please stay in there. Okay. You have 2 8mm hexes, and those are going to be used to secure the grip sheath onto the grip, just like that. Again, more pins. And we're going to fit these into the first, I'm not sure what you call it. There it goes. This is the first one. This is your, I guess, spacers. This one says Miscreant. This is the first one that goes on. There's a bunch of different slots I have to fit through. Just like that. This is the next one. This is the bigger one. Same thing, more pins. That one is catching on the threaded rod just a little bit, so we're going to hold that, support it. And just make sure everything's going in properly. Again, this will be easier when there's not a camera rig in front of your face between you and the blaster. But there it goes, it's coming together nicely. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is the trigger assembly, which is the trigger guard, the trigger, and the trigger release. The hardware is going to be this short bar. 2 of these 12mm screws, and 2 of these 8mm screws, and 1 extension spring. So first, we're going to start with the trigger. And again, just like the pusher, I like to make sure that it's not fully down. That way I can adjust where it sits. There, so you can see it's actually pretty well centered again. Oh, nope, I just moved it. There you go, just get it nice and locked in. Cool. That's good to go. Slide it into our trigger guard piece. These are going to have to be separate because of how tight they are, or done in order like this. You can't just put it together ahead of time because these parts need to go together. Now we're going to put in the next screw, which is an 8mm screw, and it is going to go in the hole furthest from the trigger. And that one will be seated first. And then following that, we're going to take this extension spring, as well as another 8mm screw, put it through, Feed that one into the next hole. And then seat that one in as well. So now this piece is ready to go. Alright, next thing we're going to do is work on our plunger. So the first piece you're going to need is the plunger head. This thin rod, I've already put on the hex and one of the small O-rings from earlier. Now the next thing you're going to do is take this, slide it so the hex fits into the hex slot inside of the head, and then slot the next little O-ring over the front. These two O-rings work together to create an air seal, so that as this slides, no air gets through it. Just blocks up those little holes. Initially you're going to start by doing it barely tight enough so that you can be grabbed by the threaded rod, like the hex just touches and pushes down on the plunger head. But once it starts moving like that, see how the head's moving, you want to grab the head like this and twist it against the hex so that you're creating nice tension. And if it does not, you want it to be able to see the threaded rod just barely peeking out. So if it's not coming out, grab it and just thread this down a little bit farther. Just kind of works so that you can just barely see the threaded rod peeking out of the top. And then make it, hand tight, not overly too much, but just enough so that there's not going to be any air getting through it. You should be able to just feel the threaded rod sticking out. Then you're going to take your spacer, slide that in, that'll fit nicely into place right there. Take another hex again, and make sure all your hexes the flat side, because there's a side with the plastic and there's a side with the metal. Make sure that metal side, that flat side, is facing inwards. And you should be able to tighten this down. This side should have a lot of friction because you tighten them together. And get that like pretty close to all the way down. Take the catch little head, and then you can do that by hand. And you want to be able to just barely see the tip of it like sticking through so that it'll start guiding the next hex nut. And then you can either press on it with your finger or put it against the edge of a table. But whatever you do, you're just trying to apply pressure to this hex. So as you tighten it, there's not a lot of play in the catch. You might hear a little rattle, that's fine. It's just this piece. And there you go, that's all set to go. Take your O-ring, give it a little stretch, slide it over the pusher head, just like that. A little bit of lubricant, just around the body like so. And then a little bit on the inside of the plunger tube. And just try to get that as far down as you can. Now this is ready to go in. Alright, next thing we're going to do is just put this together. We have most of our parts in place. So let's slide our plunger in. Make sure you don't stab yourself on these, you can push them down. If it feels a little tight, just give it a little wiggle. Get that lubricant spread all the way through. Like that. Now we can slide our trigger system into place, but we need to put these two pins in. Depending on the print, these will be more difficult. I wouldn't try to force them in. Like, don't try to just crank them in by hand. Go really slow with these because this piece is pretty brittle until it's attached. So I found like a pair of pliers and just gripping it firmly and just kind of pushing it into place. Or if you have a drill, doing them like one at a time, you can kind of you can really carefully take this, grip that around it, and you can open up any of these holes if they're not quite full enough just by pushing it in, and that will knock out anything without risking damaging. Well, not risking it, but without more aggressively pushing through. Like you'll mitigate your chances of damaging your blaster. Okay, it's good to go. And then make sure everything slots together so the trigger has to slide into that groove. And then these two pieces slot right here. And then those threaded rods will push right on through. And then the last pieces are these two long threaded rods, which go right in there. Like so. And then if they don't want to slide through, just a little tap with your pliers or whatever tool you're using. Anything will work. You just need to be sticking out like that. Nothing too aggressive. Alright. Now we have most of the back end put together. Just put those threaded rods through. Alright. Wipe off any lubricant. Doesn't matter. It'll come right off. Now we take the main body right here, which as you can see has got some stuff in there, so you know, anything you have lying around. A screwdriver, I'm using a thread rod because it was literally next to me just now. I'm just knocking off some of those burrs. I'll just go over it, make sure it's all clean, ready to go, in case I accidentally miss anything while during my cleanup. It's a lot harder to find them when you are shipping them out as pieces, so I do apologize if I leave anything behind, but it takes a few seconds, you know, just knock the little bits out. Just like that. Alright, so this flat side is what's going to go directly in. And because this barrel is already in, we fitted this, we made sure it works. We're going to take it out. Right, really gently. We're actually going to attach this part right away. And we want this ring of the spring to be slotted through so that it's visible when you flip this over. So again, I can, you know, anything you want. You can use your 2mm piece right here, just like that. I'm going to put it back in the drill. And then there's this groove on the top of it, which allows you to have access to this spring from underneath. So I'm going to fit it into the drill, and then I'm going to just loop it in like that. And now you're using another small 3mm hex. And this all goes together, and this should slot nicely onto the blaster. And just like that, you have the majority of the back half of the blaster put together. Make sure these extend just further past this. You can look at it from the side like that, and that's like the perfect length for those. Now you're going to take one of these, this triangle piece. I don't know if it's a triangle, but triangular shaped thing. Pins in the back, like so. You're going to slot this on top the threaded rod. Sorry about that, I'm knocking the camera. Nice and slide into place. I'm going to take this guy, which again might need a little bit of cleanup. Not that it affects it. It'll come off in the when you put the barrel through. It's just little frayed bits of stuff. It has a slight curve on one side, and that is the side that is facing away from the body of the blaster. Just fitting it over the barrel, making sure everything slides through. Sorry, put that on the camera so you can see it. We're just fitting that right over the barrel. Make sure you go nice and slow with this. If you put your finger on and just kind of shove it, you do run the risk of corking yourself, which is never fun. So just grab from the sides. Be really careful with it. Go nice and slow. Because that is not the correct way to build it. You know, you don't want to push down with your hand. If you have gloves, that could help, but really just want to not have your hand in the way. Top there. Oops. You're just knocking in these little pins at this point. And this one will stick out less than the other ones, and that's fine. It's just to help kind of set things into place. If you look at the print on the underside of this, I think that's the easiest way to tell. You can kind of see the grooves. One side has longer, I guess, notches in it. Like, your pins will fit deeper on this side than they will on this side. And you want that short side to be facing towards. You want that short side to be facing towards the stock of the blaster. And then put 2 more pins in, like so. And then fit that front cover on. And then this is just so that we can make sure everything's nice and tensioned down properly. Take your wing nut and fit it over the threaded rod in the front. If you can. Alright, so just take your wing nut, thread it onto the front of your blaster. Like so, and this is just to put tension throughout the top half of the body. So we're just going to twist it down because we are going to use this to grab the barrel and we don't want it to be loose. So as you can see, those gaps are closing up throughout the length of the body, and once they have, like, you know, you feel it in your fingers, should be nice and tensioned. The seams should be pretty close together. You don't want to be breaking any of the PLA because this is something you can do. You can just keep turning this, keep turning this, keep turning this, and eventually you'll break the plastic because, you know, metal versus plastic, the metal's always going to win. But just put some tension on it so that these seams disappear. And then we're going to take our small locking hex and one of these 12mm screws. And on either side of this, there's 2 little divots. One will fit this hex, and then the other one will be just a hair too small. So we're going to take our 12mm screw and we're going to put it through on the too small for the hex side. Just So it starts to peek out. Then we're just going to put our hex on top of it like that. I just hold it in place with my thumb. And just like that. And it might crack a little, that's totally fine. It's not going to close the gap entirely in there, but it just needs to be tight on the barrel. And you don't want to crush the barrel, so you don't close the gap, just enough to put a little pressure on it, because this thing doesn't move, but you're just trying to, you know, help add some stability. You're not trying to lock everything in place. It's all designed to hold everything in place on its own. You know, a little bit of friction here and there, and this is just one piece to, you know, seal the deal. Okay, now that that screw is in place, you can take these two front ends off, and now we are going to attach the front pump. No, we're not. Okay, so now that that's already on, we took this off, and now we can start putting together our catch assembly. It's going to be this long opening jaw, the catch housing, and then the little catch itself. And our hardware is pretty simple. It's just going to be these two 12mm screws and one spring. Alright, so we're going to take our catch, put the spring into place. You want the angle to be facing into the catch housing. And if it's not quite sitting properly, just, you know, give it a little nudge. And it doesn't quite want to settle, so I'm going to take little pliers and just shorten it just a hair. And you can adjust that cut down to your own preference for tension. And I personally make all of mine pretty light. Even that feels a little too heavy. Because the lighter you go, the easier it will be to release the trigger. There we go. So that's a pretty short spring. Now you're going to take your spring and just slot it into place. And that's good. That feels nice and light. It pushes the whole assembly back down with enough force that you're not like, you know, it shouldn't be like nothing, but you'll feel it, right? Take your last two little 12mm screws. And I like to make sure that they get seated in the holes because it's kind of troublesome. But, you know, you'll feel them catch. And then I do it so that they just press out of the end right here. Sorry. Knocking my camera around. There we go. Both sides are just sticking out, and that way I can kind of feel where they lock it, like right there, perfectly sit in. A little bit of tension. Oops. Just like that. Assembly is put together. It's all locked in nice and tight. It's ready to go. Now we're going to take these two rods. There's four that are the same length, and two of them have holes in them. Okay. So we're going to take the two that have holes in them. Make sure the holes are all lined up because they are slightly off. I can see. It's not a lot, and lining them up, all that does is, you know, reduce friction throughout the system. If they're off, it doesn't matter. Like, it'll be a little more pressure to prime because it'll kind of try to get stuck, but it really makes no difference. If those holes lined up on the inside, find out where the orientation is, just like that. I said no difference, but it makes the difference is friction. But I mean, realistically, it's very hard to notice when you're playing a game, and it only really is noticeable until the blaster is worn in. So sorry, we're taking our grub screws and we are just putting them in, not over tightening them. We're just making sure that they touch into the bars and lock them in place. All right, so we want to make sure that they go relatively deep, maybe like 1.5 millimeters in, and then you don't want to push through. I put walls on the inside of the print so they shouldn't be able to go through easily, but if you see them bulging, you've gone too far. Just back them off a little. Then you might have to file that plastic. But that's ready to go. Take your cap cover, just slide it on. And then for now, we're not going to put the spring in. We're just going to do a little fit. Just like so. Use a screwdriver, just push these guys forward because they do tend to seat back. And then let's drop our thumb screws into place. This is brass and this is steel, so you want to make sure that like you might find that they won't slide on perfectly right off the bat. If you force them, maybe just grab your threaded rod with a drill and pre-thread these. They'll lock on much easier. At least that's how I found it. Because if there's any little imperfection on either side, they will get stuck. They won't just break off like with steel on steel. The brass will try to, deform around it, and it's kind of a pain, but I mean that's just the nature of the beast. So that's that. Now we are going to start on doing what will end up being the grip and the grip holders, which will move the pusher. So in order to do the pump assembly, you have these two little brackets, a thicker one and a thinner one. The thicker one is going to go on the back. Just line up the holes. Take one of your little grub screws. You can just knock this out of the way. And just put it in just so that it's not coming out the top. And you can check the bottom, make sure it's not coming out there. See that side? I don't know if you can see it on this camera. There's about 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters farther I can go. So I'm just going to seat it just a little bit deeper. Just like that. Now our pump is going to slide on. Goes through, and through. And we can put the front bracket on. Again, same thing, slide it over the hole, take your grub screw, and just gently move the side rod out of the way, and fit it in so that it's just pushing through barely. Now, we can fix our top Picatinny rail on the blaster like that. Pop these rods in, and these just go through the slot inside the pump right here. And they'll fit into a slot right here. Pop on your scar barrel or regular barrel, depending on which one you want. Obviously the scar offers like a wicked performance increase in terms of accuracy, but the regular one is not awful on its own. Just like that, it's looking good. Now, just as you would if you were changing out the spring, to install the spring, just take off your thumb screws, Alright, take this thing off, slide the catch forward. Once you've got the catch assembly put together, just take your spring, slide it in, remembering that use this sleeve, and that will work for the K26. The current setup will work for a 788, a K25, or a K14, depending on what you decide to install. I took off the little orange sleeve. If you don't put it on, it's fine. Just slide this thing down, slide the sleeve on, into place, pull it back out, put your spring back in, nice and quick, close that down, and then try to get the holes aligned. The farther hole will allow you to prime it, but it won't create a seal once you put it in. That is what the closer hole is for. There. And then if you're finding that it's a little troublesome to get the pin all the way through, just make sure that the holes are lined up. You can see the holes are lined up, but the pin is just not quite sliding through, so just give it a little tap, and kind of like you're gonna have to work the metal a little as it self-adjusts. It's primed. Take your thumb screws, fit them on, like so. Like I said, it won't go all the way forward. So just take the pin out, make a few good twists. Slide the bar down by hand. Put the pin into the hole that is closest to the trigger. Now it should slot forward. And just like that, as long as I didn't forget anything, your Miscreant is ready to go.